Uh, Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's quite some time when we last met. I'm here to take you through another session, and I am Clovis Kawaseke from Mountains of the Moon University, an ardent enthusiast of agroecology. Actually, before we begin our class today, I'd like to tell you that last time we didn't meet because I was giving a keynote address at a very important symposium at Hotel Africana in Kampala, where we had a symposium of agroecology practitioners from different organizations in Uganda, and others were online from other parts of East Africa. Actually, this symposium was attended by over 300 organizations, and it was called a National Agroecology Actors Symposium. That was the sixth from the time these annual events started taking place in Kampala. It was something very, very interesting, and we discussed quite a lot about agroecology. There are certain things that I noticed from that symposium, basing on the presentations that were made by very key people, experts of agroecology, members of parliament. We had some ministers, and other government representatives from Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. They made a lot of presentations, and I noticed there are certain gaps that we need really to address in agroecology. And during our training, I think I'll try to make sure that I address some of those weaknesses that I saw, and again, build even on the strengths that I also noticed in that very important symposium. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think if I remember very well, in the last sessions we covered agroecology at a glance, just a quick overview of agroecology, and to have a good foundation knowledge about agroecology, we started by actually discussing ecology. We discussed principles of ecology. We also discussed types of ecology. There are quite a number. And then after that, we realized that among the types of ecology, there is also what we call agroecology, which is the honors of our study. And we embarked on the few definitions of agroecology. Of course, there are many, but I think we covered about 3. Then after that, we also talked about the 3 facets of agroecology. We also talked about agroecology as a set of farming practices, where we covered quite a number. Among them was soil fertility management, organic pesticides, water use efficiency in agroecology, and so on. Today, I think we shall begin by taking you back to be very sure that you really have a proper understanding of the origin and some brief history of agroecology. This is extremely important. If we will have to understand agroecology properly and its relevance, we need actually to be very sure that we know how it all came about and why it should be studied today. If we have to talk about the early concepts of agroecology, we should understand that the roots of agroecology can be traced back to traditional farming practices that emphasized biodiversity, soil health, and local knowledge. Those are very, very important things. We also must understand that indigenous agricultural systems often integrated ecological principles long before the term was formally coined. This term of agroecology was coined at some point, but even before that, the indigenous agricultural systems were observing ecological principles. But in 1940s, between 1940s and 1960s, that's when the term agroecology was first introduced. If I can be more precise, so must have been perhaps around the 1930s, but then it started gaining prominence in the 1940s and the 1950s. We had some good scientists like De Andrade and Altieri, who actually began to explore the interactions between agricultural systems and ecological processes. In the 1970s, now the modern agroecology movement emerged, and they were there to respond to the negative environmental impacts of industrial agriculture. By that time, the industrial agriculture has actually taken prominence in all the areas, and what industrial agriculture was actually doing to human health and to the environment was so bad that scholars and activists started advocating for sustainable practices that respected the ecological balance. Because what industrial agriculture was doing at that time, it was excessively using toxic chemicals which were destroying the environment and biodiversity, but at the same time it was also impacting on human health. In the 1980s and 1980s, agroecology gained international attention through conferences and publications organized by global organizations like Food and Agriculture Organizations, FAO. And the whole world started actually understanding why agroecology was extremely important. In the 21st century, here I'm talking about these recent years, here we are in the 21st century, agriculture has been further embraced by movements advocating for food sovereignty, sustainable development, and climate resilience. Because within this century, we have started realizing that it's not only important to have food security, and we have even started understanding what food security exactly means. It doesn't mean abundance of food alone, but it means having abundant food which is safe, which is accessible, which is nutritionally balanced, which is socially acceptable. All those form food security. But this aspect of food sovereignty is also emerging with a lot of strength, because unless you are able to control your own food value chains, right from field to fork, you can never think that you actually have food sovereignty. You must control the seeds, you must know your breeds and varieties in order to know that you have food sovereignty. And this is something that is being advocated for and is coming up very strongly during the 21st century. Sustainable development and climate resilience is very, very important in this century. And of late, the whole world has actually come to realize that the biggest challenge we have is climate change. And this climate change is not about to be reversed, because it is going to take many, many decades before one can think of reversing climate change. But what we need to do in agroecology is to ensure that we are resilient. We can actually recover from the shocks that are associated with climate change. So agroecology has become a framework for addressing global challenges in agriculture, and this is the only way to go if we think that we can manage to survive and adapt to climate change effects. And again, if we believe that biodiversity still means something to us. As I continue talking about some history of agroecology, I want to take you back to the 1960s and 70s, when there was the development of agroecological research and practices emphasizing integrated pest management and organic farming. Now, when we talk about integrated pest management, we are actually trying to mean that you don't have to use only one specific approach if you have to manage pests and diseases, which are really a very big concern in agricultural production. I know in conventional agriculture, people tend to use a lot of chemicals because they want to manage pests and diseases. And these chemicals are non-selective when they are actually destroying the target pests. They also destroy the very beneficial insects, which are like the pollinators and other, which actually help in soil erosion in order to, in soil aeration in order to make the soil structure very agreeable to farming. So during the 1960s and 70s, the agroecological research and practices emphasized integrated pest management, where you can use biorationals, some methods which you can use concoctions made from grown plants, where you can use some cultural methods like field hygiene, where you can use some interventions like going in for disease and pest-resistant varieties. All those were being used. And when brought together, that's what we call integrated pest management. And to do integrated pest management, what is mostly required is to understand properly what we call the disease triangle. The disease triangle, this is where you have the virulent, where you have a virulent pathogen with a susceptible host in a conducive environment. Then a disease will actually take place. But if you break one of those sides of the triangle, then the disease will not take place. For instance, if the host is not susceptible, even when the pathogen or the pest comes, it will find the host very strong and it may not suffer to bring any economic loss. If the pathogen is not very active, very strong, it may not actually manage to beat the immunity of the host, so the disease will not take place. This is why there is always immunization. They actually inject the host with a weakened pathogen so that the body can now develop defense mechanisms against that particular one. Or if the environment is not conducive, the disease will not take place. For instance, if you have a susceptible patient who can catch malaria very quickly because of old age or because of poor immunity, and then you have a mosquito which is having a very strong pathogens, but then there is a mosquito net which stops the mosquito from reaching the host. It means that the mosquito doesn't have a conducive environment. In so doing, you have broken the disease triangle. So those are some of the things you can use when you are trying to do integrated pest management. In the 1990s, there was establishment of networks and organizations promoting agroecology, such as the Agroecology Research Group and the International Society of Agroecology. Actually, we need to go for a short break at this time, and we shall actually begin on these key milestones when we resume in a few minutes' time to come. Thank you very much.